"Move out of the way, Leo, before you get yourself killed." The sharp voice of Alina sliced through the warm afternoon air as the tall grass around the pond swayed in restless ripples. Her German shepherd, Leo, had darted forward without hesitation, ignoring her call, his ears pinned back and his body tense with an urgency she could not yet understand. She had come here for peace, to escape the noise of town. But instead, the pond had become the stage for something she never expected to witness. The surface of the water shimmered with sunlight, and at first glance nothing seemed out of place. But Leo was not the kind of dog to act without reason. His growl was low, controlled, and insistent. Alina followed his gaze and froze. A tiny duckling, no larger than her hand, flapped desperately in the water, its small body weighed down by a snarl of reeds and tangled weeds. Every second it fought only tightened the grip around its fragile wings, pulling it further under. The other ducklings had already reached the far bank with their mother, who circled back, quacking frantically, torn between instinct to protect the others and the helpless cries of the one left behind. Elena's chest tightened. She knew the cruel logic of nature. Not every life could be saved. Yet, standing there with her heart pounding, she also knew Leo would not stand idle. "Don't you dare go in there," she muttered under her breath. But even as the words left her mouth, the shepherd launched himself toward the water. His powerful frame cut through the pond's edge, scattering mud and lilies, sending ripples in every direction. Alina gasped and stepped forward, her shoes sinking into the soft ground, fear clawing at her throat. What if the weeds trapped him too? What if the water dragged him under? The duckling's cries were faint now, its small beak opening and closing. In quiet panic, Leo reached it in a flurry of splashes, his fur slick against his body. He nudged the duckling with his snout, but the weeds clung stubbornly, refusing to release their grip. Alina bit her lip, torn between running in herself and trusting the dog who had never failed her. "Come on, boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't let it go." Leo barked sharply, a sound that echoed across the pond like a command to the world itself. With a determined twist of his head, he clamped his teeth gently onto the reeds, pulling hard. The duckling shrieked, wings beating against the water as the stubborn weeds gave way one by one. In that instant, Elena's breath caught. She realized she was not watching a simple rescue. She was witnessing a choice, a dog refusing to accept nature's indifference, refusing to walk away from a life teetering on the edge. Finally, with one last pull, the duckling broke free. Leo lifted it carefully, almost tenderly, carrying the trembling bundle back through the shallows. Alina fell to her knees at the bank, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears prickling her eyes before she even noticed them forming. Leo dropped the duckling gently onto the grass, where it lay motionless for a second before letting out a weak but defiant chirp. The mother duck, emboldened now, hurried over, gathering her lost child back into her feathers with desperate relief. Alina reached out to Leo, wrapping her arms around his wet fur, ignoring the mud that smeared her clothes. "You stubborn, reckless fool," she whispered, her voice breaking with a mixture of scolding and gratitude. His tongue brushed her cheek, warm and steady, as though to remind her that some battles, no matter how small, are worth fighting. And in that moment, by a simple pond under the golden wash of sunlight, a woman, a dog, and a duckling became bound by an unspoken truth. Compassion, even against the odds, is what gives the wild its quiet, enduring beauty. Alina couldn't shake the image of Leo dragging that fragile duckling back to safety. All evening, as she sat by her small kitchen window, she replayed the moment, wondering what drove him to act with such determination. Leo lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, his fur still faintly damp, his eyes watchful and calm. She wanted to scold him for the risk he had taken, but every time her gaze met his, the words faded away. Instead, she felt something stirring inside her, a quiet recognition that her dog had seen a life worth saving where most would have looked away. The following morning, Alina decided to return to the pond. The sun rose behind her as she walked, the winding trail, its orange glow painting the sky with promise. Leo bounded ahead, energized, his tail high, sniffing the air as if expecting another test of courage. Yet as they approached, Alina noticed something unsettling. The pond was far quieter than usual. No rippling chorus of ducks greeted her. No flurry of wings skimmed across the water's surface. Only a stillness that pressed against her chest, heavy and unnatural. Her stomach sank as she scanned the banks. At last, she spotted the mother duck with her brood, huddled tightly near the reeds. But something was wrong. Their movements were erratic, restless, their quacks sharp and warning. Leo stiffened beside her, his ears twitching, his body lowering into a cautious stance. Alina's heart began to race. She followed their gaze and caught sight of dark ripples, slicing through the water. At first she thought it might be a harmless fish or turtle, but then she saw the sleek, sinuous body weaving beneath the surface. A snake. It was large, too large for her comfort, its movement deliberate as it circled, closer to the family of ducks. The ducklings fluttered and cried, pressing against their mother, who flapped her wings wildly in defiance. Alina's hands clenched into fists. She knew how merciless the pond could be, how quickly one life could be swallowed. Leo let out a low growl, his muscles quivering with the same electric urgency she had seen yesterday. "No," she whispered sharply, though her voice trembled. "Leah, don't you dare." But even as the words escaped her, she knew she was powerless to stop him. He lunged forward, charging toward the bank, sending up sprays of mud and water as he plunged in again. Elena's heart lurched into her throat. The snake reared its head above the water, glistening scales catching the morning light, its jaws parting with chilling intent. Leo closed the distance with furious speed, the water churning around him. The mother duck cried out, torn between shielding her ducklings and retreating. For a split second, Alina wished she could close her eyes, wished she didn't have to witness what would happen next. But she couldn't look away. Her world had narrowed to the furious rhythm of water, the sharp hiss of the snake, and the desperate splashes of her dog fighting against nature itself. When Leo reached the snake, it struck its head, darting like a whip. He twisted aside, narrowly avoiding its fangs, and snapped at its coiling body. The water boiled with movement, a violent struggle between predator and protector. Alina screamed his name, her voice tearing from her throat, her legs instinctively carrying her closer, though fear kept her steps faltering. She knew she couldn't intervene, but the helplessness gnawed at her, clawing her insides raw. Then came the twist she had not anticipated. In the chaos, one of the ducklings panicked and darted away from the group, flapping frantically toward the open pond. Elena's eyes widened in horror. If the snake broke free from Leo's grip, it would find easy prey. If Leo turned his attention to the duckling, he'd leave himself vulnerable. It was a choice no creature should have to make, yet the moment hung suspended, demanding an answer. Leo's growl reverberated across the water as he sank his teeth deeper into the snake's body, holding it fast despite its violent thrashing. The duckling, oblivious to the danger, struggled against the weight of water pulling it down. Alina felt the air leaving her lungs, torn between two unfolding tragedies. Her fists shook at her sides. She wanted to scream, to wade in herself, but she knew it was beyond her reach. All she could do was trust the animal who had already proven his heart once before. In a desperate surge, Leo twisted his body, dragging the snake toward the reeds, forcing it away from the ducks. The snake writhed, but his relentless grip drove it into the shallow mud where it finally recoiled, slithering back into the darker waters with a furious splash. Leo stood panting, water dripping from his muzzle, his eyes burning with unyielding resolve. Yet he didn't stop there. He turned sharply and swam toward the lone duckling, scooping it up gently in his mouth just as its strength began to fade. Alina dropped to her knees at the water's edge, relief flooding her body so forcefully it nearly knocked the breath from her. Her hands shook as she reached out when Leo returned, laying the shivering duckling down beside its siblings. The mother duck gathered her brood with frantic love, her feathers fluffed, her head bowed low as though acknowledging the strange alliance that had saved them twice. Alina pulled Leo into her arms, burying her face against his soaked fur, tears mixing with the pond's muddy scent. "You'll be the death of me," she whispered, her voice broken but filled with awe. He leaned against her, his steady heartbeat echoing through her trembling hands. In that moment, Alina understood something she hadn't before. This wasn't just about a duckling, or a snake, or even a dog's bravery. It was about a reminder she had forgotten. Compassion doesn't hesitate. It doesn't weigh risks, it simply acts, no matter the cost. As the pond quieted again, the ducks drifting back into safer waters, Alina knew the story wasn't over. Nature would test them again, perhaps in harsher ways. But what Leo had shown her was undeniable. Courage was not the absence of danger, it was the refusal to let fear decide who lived and who was left behind. Elena's hands trembled as she poured water from her flask over Leo's fur, wiping away the pond weeds that clung stubbornly to his coat. He sat proudly at her side, chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a warrior who had faced a storm and returned victorious. The duckling, now reunited with its mother, nestled safely beneath her wing as if nothing had happened. But for Alina, the air still pulsed with the intensity of what she had just witnessed. The pond, once a place of quiet retreat, now carried the weight of something unshakable. She could not shake the thought that Leo had looked death in the eye and chosen defiance. Yet peace did not last. A sudden rustle broke the stillness, sharp and unsettling. Leo's ears pricked forward instantly and his body stiffened, the earlier softness replaced with raw alertness. Alina followed his gaze toward the far bank, where shadows stretched beneath the reeds. At first, she thought it was just the shifting play of sunlight, but then came the sound, a low guttural growl, faint but undeniable. Her blood turned cold. The duck's distressed calls had not gone unheard, and the pond had other visitors lurking in its silence. Before she could react, Leo moved closer to the water, his tail stiff, his growl deepening with a warning only the wilderness could truly understand. Elena's heart pounded, torn between pulling him back and trusting the instincts that had saved the duckling minutes before. She whispered his name, her voice strained with fear, but he stood rooted, eyes burning into the shadows. Then, from the thicket, a shape emerged, sleek, predatory, and patient, a fox. Its amber eyes gleamed as it fixed its gaze not on Leo, but on the fragile cluster of ducklings now huddled by the water's edge. Elena's throat tightened. The rescue had only delayed a harsher truth. Nature's balance had not shifted out of pity. It had simply moved on to the next hunter. But Mother Duck flapped her wings in a frenzy, but her cries were powerless against the quiet hunger in the fox's eyes. Alina looked at Leo, silently pleading for restraint, but she knew better. His body lowered into a defensive stance, every muscle alive with intent. This was no longer about a single duckling. This was about survival, about a dog unwilling to watch life undone after saving it. The standoff thickened the air. Leo growled again, deep and commanding, the kind of sound that cut across species and made even the bravest pause. The fox hesitated, its paws sinking into the damp earth, its eyes flicking between Leo's imposing frame and the trembling meal it had hoped to claim. For a moment, the world narrowed to this fragile line, predator and protector, hunger and defiance. Elena's nails dug into her palms as she held her breath, terrified that Leo might charge, terrified that he might not. Then came the twist she did not expect. The fox, instead of retreating, took a step forward. It was gaunt, its ribs showing. Through its thin coat, desperation written into every cautious movement. This was no careless hunter. This was a creature driven by need, by a hunger stronger than fear. Elena's heart ached as she realized the fox was no villain, only another victim of the merciless cycle Leo had dared to interrupt. The pond had become a battlefield of choices, whose life held more weight, whose struggle deserved compassion. Leo barked sharply, his voice echoing with authority, but Elena felt the pull of something deeper. She fumbled through her satchel, her mind racing. There was bread left from her lunch, broken pieces wrapped in cloth. Her hands shook as she tossed a chunk toward the fox, her heart battling the instinct that told her she was meddling with nature. The fox's ears flicked back, its body tense, but the scent reached it all the same. It edged forward cautiously, hunger overriding its hesitation, and seized the offering before darting back into the shadows with wary eyes never leaving Leo. Silence fell again, heavy but different this time. Alina exhaled slowly, her body shivering with the weight of what had just unfolded. She turned to Leo, his fur still bristling, his eyes locked on the thicket where the fox had disappeared. When he finally relaxed, sinking onto the grass beside her, she realized he had accepted the compromise. The ducklings were safe, the fox was fed, and for one fleeting moment, the cruelty of nature had bent under the fragile will of compassion. Alina stroked Leo's damp fur, her thoughts restless. She had always believed that survival was about strength and instinct, but today had shown her something more profound. Survival was also about choice, about daring to intervene, even when the world whispered it was pointless. Her eyes drifted to the water, where the ducklings now swam once again, their tiny bodies scattering ripples across the pond as if to erase the memory of danger. Yet for Alina, the moment was etched into her unerased. She leaned close to Leo, her voice low and trembling. "You've changed everything. You know that you've made me see what it means to fight for life, even when it isn't yours to fight for." His eyes softened as he looked at her, and, though he could not speak, she felt his answer in the calm steadiness of his gaze. It was not about ownership, not about heroism, but about a refusal to let despair go unchallenged. The sun lowered over the pond, painting the sky with streaks of gold and fire, as if the world itself wanted to honor the fragile balance that had been restored. Alina sat in silence beside her dog, knowing the story was not over. The pond would see predators again. The fox would return, hungrier, bolder. But for today, compassion had written its own ending, and in her heart, she clung to the fragile truth. Leo had shown her that sometimes defiance, even in the smallest act, could change everything. Elena's hands trembled as she pressed them against the damp grass. Her eyes locked on the fragile duckling nestled against its mother's side. For a fleeting moment, everything seemed resolved, the kind of quiet ending she longed for. Then she noticed the way the little bird kept slipping, its movements weak, its feathers still heavy with pond water. The mother duck quacked urgently, nudging her baby. But the duckling's wings faltered, its tiny body collapsing back into the dirt. Elena's stomach twisted with dread. The rescue was not over. Nature had a cruel habit of taking back what it briefly allowed to survive, and she feared this might be one of those moments. Leo paced beside her, restless, his eyes flicking between the trembling duckling and Elena's face as if he, too, understood the fragility of the life before them. "No, not after all this," Elena whispered, her voice breaking, her heart pounding as though it were her own child struggling in front of her. She could feel her pulse in her throat, sharp and uneven, as her fingers hovered above the tiny body. A single wrong move might frighten the mother away, leaving the duckling even more vulnerable. But waiting felt unbearable. Suddenly the mother duck spread her wings wide, flapping and calling with sharp cries that echoed across the pond. It was a call Elena had never heard before, not soft or guiding but frantic, almost pleading. The other ducklings chirped back from the far bank, confused, huddling closer together. In that raw chorus of sound, Elena understood the mother was fighting just as hard, refusing to let go, yet powerless against the weakness in her child. It was a mirror of Elena's own desperation. To mothers bound by the same ache of helplessness, The duckling twitched, its tiny chest rising unevenly, and in that fragile motion Alina saw both hope and terror balanced on a knife's edge. Leo lowered his head, letting out a low whine that vibrated like a prayer, a sound so human in its sorrow that it nearly broke her. She clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms, torn between intervening and trusting nature to decide. The air grew heavier, the pond no longer a place of calm but of judgment, every ripple like a ticking clock counting down to a verdict neither she nor Leo could control. Then, just when silence threatened to claim the space, the duckling called. At least that was what it sounded like, water sputtering from its beak as it shook with sudden energy. The mother rushed closer, tucking the tiny body beneath her feathers as if to shield it from the world's cruelty. Alina let out a sharp, unsteady breath, tears spilling down her face without permission. Relief surged through her, fierce and overwhelming, but it carried with it a deeper realization. This rescue had not been about victory, but about witnessing how close life always hangs to the edge of loss. Alina sat back on the grass, her clothes soaked through, her hands trembling from the weight of everything that had just unfolded. The duckling was alive, barely, but alive nonetheless, tucked safely against its mother's side. The family lingered, by the water's edge, as if hesitant to move, their small forms framed by the soft shimmer of the pond. Leo lay beside her, his chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths, eyes fixed on the little bird as though guarding it still. In the stillness that followed, Alina felt something inside her, loosen, not of fear, of helplessness, of grief for all the times she had watched life slip away despite her best efforts. For once, she had seen the balance tilt toward mercy. The sun dipped lower, stretching golden light across the surface of the water, painting the moment in fragile beauty. Alina reached out and brushed her fingers over Leo's damp fur, the warmth of his body grounding her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. "You did this," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. He flicked an ear but kept his gaze steady on the ducks, as if reminding her that the work of compassion was never about recognition. It was about the instinct to act when silence might have been easier. The duckling stirred again, stronger now, lifting its head and letting out a faint chirp that echoed faintly in the quiet air. Its siblings called back from across the pond, their voices a chorus of reassurance. The mother duck hesitated only a moment longer before nudging the little one toward the water. Alina's chest tightened as she watched the duckling wade forward, each step uncertain but determined, its reflection rippling beside it. When it finally pushed into the pond, joining the current that carried it back toward its waiting family, Alina felt tears slide down her cheeks, though her lips curved into a smile she hadn't expected. Against every odds, against the weight of nature's indifference, the duckling had been returned to where it belonged. Leo rose and gave himself a shake, droplets scattering into the light, then pressed his head against her shoulder. Alina leaned into him, overcome not just by relief but by a deeper understanding that surprised her. This was not just a story of a duckling rescued or of a faithful dog's courage. It was a reminder of how thin the line is between despair and hope, how even the smallest act of defiance against loss could ripple outward like the rings on the pond, touching everything it reached. She realized that in saving the duckling, Leo had reminded her of something she had nearly forgotten, that compassion, even in its smallest form, was a force strong enough to defy endings. The family of ducks drifted together across the water, the mother's head turning back once, as though acknowledging the figures on the shore who had stood watch over her child. The sun sank lower, brushing the horizon in shades of rose and amber, the kind of light that lingers in memory long after it fades. Alina drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly, a release of the fear she had carried into this day, replaced by a quiet gratitude that settled deep in her chest. As she rose to leave, Leo padded beside her, each step in rhythm with her own. She looked back one last time at the pond, at the ducks now no more than silhouettes against the glowing water. In that fading light, she understood something simple, but profound. Life would always be fragile. But moments like this, moments of rescue, of shared struggle, of unspoken bonds, were what gave it meaning. And as the evening swallowed the last of the sun, Alina carried that truth with her, knowing it would remain long after the ripples on the pond had gone still.